Hello everyone, myself Pavitra Vyas from Department of Information Science and Engineering, Sri Venkateshwara College of Engineering. Today I'm going to explain about few topics which comes under the advanced CSS layout. Firstly, the constructing multi-column layouts. Secondly, approaches to CSS layout, and then the responsive design CSS framework. Constructing multi-column layouts. They are the raw techniques that we can use to create more complex layouts. A typical layout may very well use both positioning and floats. Using floats to create column. Using floats is perhaps the most common way to create the column of content. The first step is to float the content container that will be on the left hand side. Remember that the floated container needs to have a width specified. As can be seen in the second screen capture in, the other content will flow around the floated element. Figure shows the other key step, that is the changing left margin, so that it no longer flows back under the floated content. Here are some issues. The background of the floated element stops when its content ends. If we wanted the background color to descend down to the footer, then it is difficult, but it is not impossible to achieve this virtual effect with floats. A three-column layout could be created in much the same manner as shown in the figure page layout. Another approach is by creating a three-column layout is to float elements within a container element. This approach is actually a little less brittle because the floated elements with a container are independent of elements outside the container. Notice again that the floated content must appear in the source before the non-floated content. This is the main problem with the floated approach. Using positioning to create the columns. Positioning can also be used to create a multi-column layout. Typically, the approach will make use of absolute positioning. Figure illustrates a typical three-column layout implemented via positioning. Notice that with positioning it is easier to construct our source document with content in a more user-friendly manner. In this case, the main div, that is the division tag, can be placed first. Here, after the header, the division tag is placed first. Here are some problems which arise. What would happen if one of the sidebars had a lot of content and was thus quite long? In the floated layout, this would be not a problem at all because when an item is floated, blank space is left behind. But when an item is positioned, it is removed entirely from normal flow. So subsequent items will have no knowledge of the positioned item. This problem is illustrated in the figure. One solution to this type of problem is to place the footer within the main container. That is, to place the footer within the main container is only the solution for this problem. Here are some approaches to CSS layout. Firstly, one of the main problems faced by web designer is that the size of the screen used to view the page can vary quite a bit. Some users will visit a site on a 21-inch widescreen monitor that can display 1290 into 1080 pixels. Others will visit it on an older iPhone with a 3.3 screen and a resolution of 320 into 480p. Users with a large monitor might expect a site to take advantages of the extra. Users with a small monitor will accept the site to scale to the smaller size and still be unable. Satisfying both users can be difficult. The approach to take for one type of site content might not work as well as with another site with different content. The two basic approaches to deal with the problem of screen size are fixed and liquid layouts. Fixed layout. In a fixed layout, the basic width of the design is set by the designer itself, typically corresponding to an ideal width based on a typical monitor resolution. A common width used in something in the 960 into 1000 pixel range, which fits nicely in the common desktop. This content can then be positioned on the left of the center of the monitor. Fixed layouts are created using the pixel units, typically with the entire content with a division tag container. Whole width property has been set to some width as shown in the figure. Here are some advantages. It is easier to produce generally has a predictable virtual result. It is also optimized for typical desktop monitors. However, as more and more user visits are happening via smaller mobile devices, this advantage might now seem to some as a disadvantage. Disadvantages of fixed layouts are it shrinks below the fixed width. The user will have to horizontally roll to see all the content. Fixed layouts have other drawbacks. For larger screens, there may be an excessive amount of blank space to the left or right of the content. Much worse is when the browser window shrinks below the fixed width. The user will have to horizontally scroll to see all the content as shown in the figure. Here, the device is horizontally placed to look into the whatever the contents which are being displayed over here. Liquid layout. The second approach to dealing with the problems of multiple screen sizes is to use a liquid layout. The liquid layout is also known as the fluid layout. In this approach, widths are not specified using the pixels, but it has been specified using the percentage values. CSS are a percentage of the current browser width, so a layout in which all widths are expressed as percentages should adapt to the way browser size as shown in the figure. Advantages of liquid layout. It adapts to different browser sizes, so there is neither wasted white space nor any need for horizontal scrolling. Disadvantages of liquid layout. Liquid layouts can be more difficult to create because some elements such as images have fixed pixel sizes. As the screen grows or shrinks dramatically, in that the line length may become too long or too short. Other layout approaches. While the fixed and liquid layouts are the two basic paradigms of page layouts, there are some other approaches that combine the two layout styles. Hybrid layout. Hybrid layout is nothing but the combination of pixels and percentages. Fixed pixel measurements might make sense for a sidebar column containing mainly graphic advertising images that must always be displayed and which always are the same width. But percentages would make more sense for the main content or navigation areas with perhaps min and max size limits in pixels set for the navigation areas. Responsive design. Problems of a liquid layout in that images and horizontal navigation elements tend to take up a fixed size, and when the browser window shrinks to the size of a mobile browser, liquid layouts can become unusable. In a responsive design, the page responds to changes in the browser size that go beyond the width scaling of a liquid layout. In a responsive layout, images will be scaled down and the navigation elements will be replaced as the browser shrinks. There are four key components that make a responsive design work. Firstly, the liquid layout, and then the scaling images to the viewport size, setting viewports via the meta tag, customizing the CSS for different viewports using media queries. Responsive designs begin with a liquid layout, that is, one in which most elements have their widths specified as percentages. Making images scale in size is actually quite straightforward in that you simply need to specify the following rules. Max width, that is the 100%. Of course, this does not change the downloaded size of the image. It only shrinks or expands its virtual display to fit the size of the browser window, and it never expanding beyond its actual dimensions. Here we have to notice how some elements are scaling to shrink as browser window reduces the size. Setting viewports. A key technique in creating responsive layouts makes use of the ability of current mobile browsers to shrink or to grow the web page to fit the width of the screen. If we have ever used a modern mobile browser, we may have been surprised to see how the web pages was scaled to fit into the small screen of the browser. The way this works in the mobile browser renders the page on a canvas called the viewport. Example, on iPhones for instance, the viewport width is 980 pixel, and then that viewport is scaled to fit the current width of the device as shown in the figure. The mobile Safari browser introduced the viewport meta tag as a way for developers to control the size of that initial viewport. The web page can tell the mobile browser the viewport size to use via the viewport meta elements as shown in the list. Tag HTML, tag head, tag meta name is equal to viewport content width device width. By setting the viewport as in the listing, the page is telling the browser that no scaling is needed and to make the viewport as many pixels wide as the device screen width. This means that if the device has a screen that is 320 pixel wide, the viewport width will be 320 into 106 if the screen is 480 pixel, that the viewport width will be 480 px. The result will be similar to that of the shown figure. This is 960px, the mobile browser viewport, and then it has been minimized to the mobile browser screen that is 320 pixel. Firstly, the mobile browser renders the web page on its viewport, and then it scales the viewport to fit the width of the actual physical screen. Media queries. The other key component of responsive design is the CSS media queries. A media query is a way to apply style rules based on the medium that is displaying the file. We can use these queries to look at the capabilities of the device and then define the CSS rules to target the device. Unfortunately, media queries are not supported by the Internet Explorer and the earlier. Contemporary responsive sites will typically provide CSS rules for phone display first, then the tablets, then desktop monitors, and approach called progressive enhancement. The figure illustrates the syntax of a typical media query. These queries are Boolean expressions and can be added to our class CSS files or to the link element to conditionally use a different external CSS file based on the capabilities of the device. Table in the figure is a partial list of the browser features you can examine with media queries. Many of these features have minimum and maximum versions. Here are some features and its descriptions. Firstly, the width of the viewport. Height is nothing but the height of the viewport. Device width is nothing but the width of the device. Device height, height of the device. Orientation, it describes that whether the device is portrait or in the landscape. Color, the number of bits per color. The figure describes the media queries in action. Since later rules override earlier rules, this provides progressive enhancement, meaning that as the device grows, we can have CSS rules that take advantages of the larger space. Notice as well as that these media queries can be within our CSS file or within the ML element. CSS framework. A CSS framework is a pre-created set of CSS classes or other software tools that make it easier to use and work with CSS. There are two main types of CSS framework: grid systems and CSS preprocessors. Grid systems make it easier to create multi-column layouts. There are many CSS grid systems. Some of the most popular are Bomap, second one the Blueprint, and 960. Print designers typically use grids as a way to achieve visual uniformity in a design. In print design, the very first thing a designer may do is to construct, for instance, a 5 or 7 or 12 column grid in a page layout program like InDesign or Crack Express. The rest of the document, whether it to be text or graphics, will be aligned and resized according to the grid as shown in the figure. The 960 framework uses either a 12 or a 16 column grid. Bootstrap uses a 12 column grid. Blueprint uses a 24 column grid. The grid is constructed using the tag div elements with classes defined by the framework. The HTML elements for the rest of your sites are then placed within these div tag elements. Listing 2.2 illustrates a 3-column layout within the grid system of the 960 framework. Listing 2.3 shows the same thing in a Bootstrap framework. In both system, elements are laid out in rows. Elements in a row will span from IoT 12LN to the 960 systems. A row is terminated with the tag div class is equal to clear. Div la bootstrap content must be placed within the division class row container. The first image describes the grid which is being constructed for the column layout within the grid system, and then the next one is for the Bootstrap framework. Both of these frameworks allow columns to be nested, making it quite easy to construct the most complex of layouts. CSS frameworks may reduce your ability to closely control the styling on your page, and conflicts may occur when the multiple CSS frameworks are used together. This is for the normal column container, and this is for the Bootstrap. CSS preprocessors. CSS preprocessors are the tools that allow the developer to write CSS that takes advantage of programming ideas such as variables, calculations, functions, and inheritance. A CSS preprocessor is a tool that takes the code written in some type of the preprocessed language and then it converts that code into normal CSS. The advantage of a CSS preprocessor is that it can provide additional functionalities that are not available in CSS. One of the best ways to see the power of a CSS preprocessor is with colors. For instance, in figure, the background color of the box class, the text color in the footer element, the border color of the fields, and the text color for placeholder text within the text area element might all be set to hashtag 796D60. The trouble with the regular CSS is that when a change needs to be made, then some type of copy and replace is necessary, which always leaves the possibility that a change might be made to the wrong element. The figure describes the instance background color of the box class, the text color of the footer element, etc. This example uses SAS, that is nothing but systematically avism style sheet. Here 3 variables are defined. Then the processor is some type of the tool that the developer would run, and then the output is displayed over here. Here I'm done with my topic. Thank you. Have a nice day.